Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, and today I want to explore how the tech community responded to the global pandemic and what software can play in containment. In addition to helping doctors respond to the crisis, today's guest also designed the first US contact tracer in the App Store and developed an app that is a little like Yelp, but for COVID safety. And these projects all sprung out of citizen-led volunteer efforts, because people wanted to do something to address the problem, and technology amplified their response. So today I want to talk about the technology behind all that and explore questions such as, is contract tracing going to work? What is technology capable of doing in response to a crisis like this? And what are the strengths and what are its limitations? And what is it like designing in an environment where information changes so quickly? And of course, what else can technology solve for us in the context of this crisis that we find ourselves? So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to the US, where Tito is waiting to speak with us, who's a partner at Upstatement, which is a creative studio that specialises in digital transformation and so much more. But enough for me. Let's get him on the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure, Neil. I am Tito Botita. I'm a principal at Upstatement. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But for myself, I started my career as a journalist designing for the Boston Globe and the New York Times. That's really where Upstatement was born. You know, I met my co-founders in college, but it wasn't until we all kind of found ourselves building digital products in the Boston Globe newsroom that we thought, hey, like we could probably do this for anybody. And so we opened a creative studio called Upstatement, and now we're more than a decade old and about 45 people strong. And we work with publishers like Random House and PBS NewsHour. We work with big brands like ESPN and Tito's Vodka, PGA Tour, and a lot of higher education like Harvard and MIT. And we call ourselves a digital brand and product studio, which I could unpack a little bit for you.
Yes, please.
Basically, when someone wants to make a new digital thing or rethink their business, they come to us and we help them find a vision for their brand through strategy and design. So like user interviews and design thinking workshops and stuff like that. And then based on what we discover, we kind of find the opportunity and build a solution, which is usually some like core digital product, like a website or an app. That might actually even still be a little abstract. Do you think, like, would it help to give an example?
Yeah, if you could, just to help anyone listening that are hearing about you for the first time, just to understand a little more about what you do.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's use the example of Moms Demand Action. They are the largest grassroots organization in the United States working to end gun violence. So they came to us and said, you know, we're building a movement here and we want some help growing the team and making our volunteers more effective. So we went out and talked to dozens of volunteers and led workshops with key stakeholders within the organization. And together we sort of built this vision for a website that could tell their story and get new people excited to join the movement. And then the website hands off to an app that galvanizes the existing volunteer community and gives them a platform to like encourage one another and, you know, like send emojis and do all that stuff while taking real meaningful action. So it kind of recreates some of the physical community in a digital space. And together, you know, Upstatement worked with Moms Demand Action to come up with that vision. And then we designed and built both the website and the app. So that is, you know, how a typical project can look. We're starting with some big abstract problem and we figure out how to use the power of design and technology to solve it.
And you guys are on so many cool and exciting projects. But one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast today was to try and pull back the curtain on how the technology community has responded to the global crisis. So can you tell me a little bit more about how Upstatement jumped in to help design with the 3 products in response to the pandemic? Because it's fascinating what you guys are doing here and how quickly you acted as well.
Yeah, well, when all this happened, I think like a lot of people, we just stepped back and said, what can we do to help here? We're good with design and code, but it's not like we can save lives. But it turned out we were wrong about that. So, Upstatement is a distributed company, but our headquarters are in Boston. That's where most of our people are. And Boston is kind of a mecca for public health and technology. So we kind of hope to help, and we reached out to a lot of friends that we had through, work in higher education and in the medical community and in Silicon Valley, just to kind of see what opportunities were out there. And we ended up contributing to 3 major projects. They're all volunteer-led efforts, which is super fascinating. I think we'll probably talk about that. And the 3 projects are that one with Brigham and Women's Hospital, we built an app that helps doctors on the front lines make critical decisions for treating COVID patients. Then with MIT, we designed the first contact tracing app to be released in the App Store. And then with this group called Zero, we're developing something that you might call Yelp for COVID safety. So we learned a ton kind of building each of those. And I figure, I don't know, do you want to talk about those kind of one by one?
Yeah, if you could just give me an overview of how they work and the difference that they're making.
So the first one with Brigham and Women's Hospital, the story here is that, doctors most of the time have a ton of information about what they're treating. They've seen broken bones before and they've seen cancer, but, nobody has seen COVID before. So there's no playbook, no protocols. And it turns out, this situation is uncommon, but not unprecedented. And this amazing doctor, Dr. C. Lee Cohen from Brigham and Women's Hospital, had dealt with something similar when the Ebola crisis broke out. So she pulled together all the best practice research for treating COVID across a variety of different scenarios. She published it to this Google Doc that was just so popular that like the whole thing crashed. So many people were visiting it that it slowed to a crawl and it became unusable. And hundreds of other doctors were actually also contributing to this Google Doc, adding their own expertise. So she sort of created the format for a global wiki that doctors across the world were using to help keep each other updated on what to do when they encounter different situations. And, what if this hospital doesn't have any ventilator? And what if the patient is old? Or what if the patient is young? All these different scenarios. So we sort of had these 2 problems to deal with, one around editing and one around publishing. So we joined up with Dr. Cohen, and in 2 weeks, we built this from scratch application that was fully searchable and editable by hundreds of doctors. No more crashing. And in our interviews with doctors, we also heard that they preferred an app. There's also all these problems with like hospital firewalls. So the first thing that we published just for expediency was, it was sometimes getting filtered out by the firewalls at hospitals. And plus doctors are just kind of like the rest of us, where they like tapping an icon on their home screen and getting something tailored to them. So kind of in the second phase, we took another 2-week sprint and we built an app and co-published it in the App Store with Brigham and Women's Hospital. And now it's a resource that's there on the front lines for doctors as they're treating patients.
So what about contact tracing? Because that's something that governments all around the world are exploring at the minute, and there's many different ways of doing it. What have you found with this?
Yeah, well, we were lucky to get hooked up with this group at MIT, who was one of the very first people in the United States to build a contact tracing application. And they're fascinating because it's an all volunteer effort. We actually found out about it through a tweet, and we thought, well, we've got to help out because contact tracing is going to be so important in terms of flattening the curve and helping us get back to normal. So we went to the website and, we signed up and we sent emails and we heard crickets, and kind of as a last chance to try and help, I filled out this like long Google form to say that we were interested. And after submitting, they actually shared a link to their public Slack group, and I kind of tumbled through this trap door, like into the heart of things. Like in this Slack group, there were hundreds of volunteers that were actually building this first contact tracing app and, designing it, making the website, doing all these different things. It was chaotic, but super inspiring. And it was also kind of like the digital volunteer Hunger Games or something. Like there's hundreds of people in there, never met before, conversations flying all around. And, I guess I'm no stranger to internet chat rooms. Like I've been hanging out on listservs and, Prodigy and AOL and stuff since I was a kid. So I kind of talked to a ton of people inside of this, digital space, and suddenly Upstatement was in charge of designing the website. And then they asked us to design the MVP version of the app. And then we ended up designing the whole Safe Paths brand. And, it got released in the App Store, I think just a few weeks ago, and they are in talks with a lot of states and governments to provide safe contact tracing solutions. So yeah, that was that story.
And you also mentioned a third as well. Can you just expand on that one?
So yeah, with Neil, it actually might be easier to start with a question to you. I'm kind of curious what, if you think back to your first couple of trips to the grocery store after all this broke out, what was it like? Did it feel safe when you went?
When things were first breaking, I was actually in Chicago. And I think I flew home in March on this Saturday. I think it was just after St. Patrick's Day. Things were just starting to lock down. And I returned home on a half-empty plane where there was about 30 people on this entire plane, which felt a little bit strange at the time, but nothing had really sunk in at all. But when I look back now, I got the Chicago Underground to the airport. I then got on a plane and then arrived in London. I then got on the tube. And then I got from the tube, and then got a train home. And then when I got off that train, I got on a tram home. So I'd been on just about every public transport possible. But I suppose I was a little bit unaware of the dangers at the time. But I'm not someone that gets afraid by things. I'll be sensible. I'll make sure I wash my hands regularly and antibac gel on my hands and all those things, and be careful what I touch. So I'm careful, but I don't really get too afraid on things like that.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a good way to go. Yeah. Well, what about, when you knew a little bit more about what was going on and how contagious it was, and you went out to the grocery store, something simple like that. Did you feel like you were safe when you went there, and what kinds of things were they doing to keep you safe?
Yeah, again, I think it's because I have a curious mind. I question so many things. Yeah. And when I'm in a queue for a supermarket and they're offering out gloves, for example, I think they're offering out gloves to anyone that wanted to go in, and I'm like, well, that's cross contamination. You touching those gloves and giving them out to each and every person in here. But I suppose more than anything, I was just very mindful of things that I touched. And then when I got home, do I wipe things down? Do I wash my hands? All those kind of things. So I was very mindful of things more than anything.
Yeah, well, and the glove example is a great one, because gloves actually don't make you any safer. They're just like a second skin for over your hands. And so you're right, that cross contamination is, it's not that helpful. And so, the part of the idea that Zero had was, everybody, when we have to go out, people aren't sure what safety measures different businesses are taking. And so, and we're also all not sure what's safe and what's not. So, are gloves safe? Are masks good? Are carts being sanitized? Does the store have like a good sick leave policy? Are there limits on the number of customers who can come in and out? And there might be things that, Neil, you're like, well, I don't think that this I do think is safe. This I don't think is safe. Yeah. The application that we're building together is basically, you can think of it like Yelp for COVID safety, where you're going to get to look at any store you go to before you head out and see what safety practices they're taking. And, we're sort of giving them a score based on the number of safety practices that they're taking. And you can sort of decide, what you feel like the right risk level is for yourself, and what things you think are valuable. And the hope there is that it will kind of help businesses make better decisions about what's safe to do. And it'll give consumers a little bit more power in terms of saying, where do I want to go and what things are important to me, especially if you're somebody who's part of a vulnerable population, or, different people are kind of dealing with this pandemic differently. And so we're excited about the power that it gives customers to choose places that take their safety seriously. And I think it can also be an educational tool for stores to be able to say, oh, hey, the gloves are actually not a safe thing to do. Don't worry about giving that out. But actually, epidemiologists are telling us that masks are really important, that employees wear them and that customers wear them. And so that's something that you should actually be doing.
And what I love about what you did here is how you, in a time of crisis, you created 3 solutions that tackle all these problems. But if we zoom out, what do you think technology is capable of doing in response to a crisis like this? Or what did you learn from that experience as well?
Yeah, well, it's really fascinating. I think technology doesn't have artificial borders, the way that cities and states and countries do. And that's something that we're definitely reporting on a lot of the response through the lens of, what is this state doing? What is this country doing? What is this city doing? But with technology, there's a real opportunity to transcend, to build national or even international solutions. And of course, that's kind of hand in hand with scale, which technology also really has the power to do. So when it comes to efforts like contact tracing, I think there's promise to do so much more than like individual tracers can do because of the technology that we all have in our pockets. So, regular contact tracing is great for alerting people, right? But what about the stranger you sat next to on the train, or when you were coming back from on the plane and on the tube and on the public transportation? You didn't know any of those people, but what if you had been exposed to somebody during that? Technology has the power to kind of break through that anonymity and potentially let you know that you were exposed to somebody with COVID, which could help you isolate yourself, which could stop more people from getting infected. So, technology has the power to save lives and help us reopen society. I think there's a lot we can do.
And on that very topic, do you think contact tracing is actually going to work and have a huge impact? Because it does require a huge uptake and everybody downloads the app. And do you also think it can be achieved without sacrificing user privacy?
Yeah, so there's 2 questions there. Is contact tracing going to work? I think it's going to be an important part of the solution, but it's just going to be one layer. And if you want the provocative headline, no, contact tracing is not going to work. Yeah. I can unpack that a little bit. It's kind of just a simple matter of math. So, let's say that like somebody releases a contact tracing app in the US and it's a huge hit. It gets like 60 million downloads. That's like 20% of all Americans. So with that in mind, we're going to do a quick word math problem. It's going to be good. so let's imagine that 5 people get sick with COVID, right? And they each infect 5 other people. So 25 people have been exposed to COVID here. And Neil, if we assume this 20% adoption rate that we talked about for contact tracing, how many of the 25 people who have been exposed to COVID get notified?
Oh man, you're making my head hurt now. I don't know. I'm going to have to ask you to tell me.
All right. Well, I think at 20% of 25, you would think maybe 5 people, but the answer is actually 1. 1 out of those 25 people would get notified. And the reason is that if you imagine 20% adoption, 5 people are originally diagnosed with COVID. Only 1 of those 5 people has the app and can even notify the people that they've come in contact with. So that automatically knocks 20 people off the list. And then out of the 5 people that person exposed, only 1 of them has the app and could possibly find out. So we go from 25 possible exposures down to 1. So it's not 20% of the people who were exposed, it's the square root. And experts say, that we'll need like 80% penetration for digital contact tracing to be effective. So yeah, I think it's going to be a tough road. That's one of the reasons that in the US, states have relied really heavily on human contact tracing. I still think that there's a lot that technology can do to assist in the process, but it's going to be a long road and it's going to be a layered solution. And I think, Neil, you also asked about, can it be done privately, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can it be done privately? I think it can, but I also think that we're asking the wrong question when it comes to privacy. As a society, we've already made some decisions about the trade-offs that we're willing to make. So for instance, we've said that we're willing to share our location in exchange for the convenience of turn-by-turn directions. But somehow when the exchanges reopen society and get back to normal, we're all like, but privacy. And I think obviously privacy is important, but this can be done in a decentralized way and in an anonymized way and in a way that is safe. And I certainly understand the concern about that. But I think that if we take the right practices in place, that shouldn't be a problem. And I think I'm a little worried sometimes that privacy is dominating the conversation on COVID-19 in a way that it isn't around the rest of society and choices that we've kind of already decided to make. So I don't know. It seems like a reasonable deal to me to trade a little bit of privacy for a lot more freedoms.
Absolutely. And what would you say the biggest strengths and equally limitations are of these tech-based solutions? Because like you said, it can have a huge impact and it can save lives, but I think it's equally important to understand both the strengths and the limitations of this.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of useful to just think about like what technology is good at generally, right? I think that applies here. So it's amazing at automating repetitive tasks and encoding understood processes and making us more efficient, right? So if things are established, it's like move over, technology can slide right in and augment people and kind of make everyone's lives easier. In this case, so much is emerging. It's happening really fast. It's a little hard to do that. But, technology can also lead. It can create new markets and break down barriers. And, I think especially about like the ride sharing services and how they were able to, turn a market on its head and really change the way that we travel. So I think it's interesting to look at some of the projects that we talked about, through that lens. The Brigham Women's situation is actually a little bit more like the first thing I talked about, making an existing process more efficient. It was a pretty direct and bottom up kind of job. The need was obvious there, and there are generally established practices for how doctors communicate this kind of information. Doctors have protocols for communicating with one another and sharing what to do. In this case, there was just no delivery method for something that changes so quickly. And so we were able to make something available to the world and automated something that might have been tedious or hard to access. And that's kind of the borderlessness and just kind of breaking things down and the scale that technology can take. And contact tracing is interesting because I think it's a little bit more on the creating new markets and breaking down barriers. It's a lot more top down. It's this huge idea that needs to get mass adoption. Like we talked about, it kind of has a marketing problem, and where the value proposition seems like it should be obvious, it really isn't. And so, polls actually show that Americans are really skeptical of tracing apps too. And, there's no national leadership there. So it's going to be a bit of, a patchwork solution. And I just think in that case, we really want to see technology, act like Uber or Lyft did, where it kind of broke down barriers and brought people in, and suddenly, it feels like everybody has that app. You want the same thing to be true for contact tracing, but it seems like it's going to be a hard road. And then there's the third project we talked about, Zero, and I think that is kind of in the middle, where the user value is super clear. There's an opportunity to kind of transcend borders and give everyone a common set of rules for evaluating safety when they go out. And even if local governments don't demand it, it's like that app could kind of create a market and encourage businesses to follow best practices. So yeah, I think that there are different strengths and limitations there.
And another thing I'm curious about, because at the moment we've got this global pandemic, we're just coming out of it now on the other side of things, but we didn't know too much about it, and everyone's learning at the same time. So I'm curious, what is it like designing in an environment where information changes so quickly?
Oh man, it's crazy. Information decays so quickly in this environment. There's so much we don't know. It's changing every day. It really just defies planning. You have to be agile, which I feel like we were kind of ready for that. Upstatement's process is built to be really flexible, but this is just moving at a speed that's a different level. And there's so many unknowns. I think that is really the hardest thing, is just what we thought was going to be safe one day, it turns out not to be the next day. So one day you're like, oh yeah, people are going to start doing temperature checks outside of a store before you go in. And then we're like, oh, actually 70% of the cases new transmissions are asymptomatic and nobody has a fever, and so that isn't really that helpful. And so you end up kind of running around in circles a lot, and you just kind of have to have a Zen mindset about it and know that things are going to change.
Absolutely. And also, was it challenging designing this high quality of work under such huge pressure? So many constraints around you as well. How challenging was that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely challenging. But I feel like on the other side, not enough people ask the opposite question. Most of our projects are much longer and nobody asks, was it challenging doing quality work when there was so much time for things to go wrong? The decisions are slow and there's a ton of feedback. And then that random executive stakeholder had terrible feedback that threatened to derail the project. Those circumstances aren't ideal either. Long timelines aren't necessarily great. So I think we actually appreciated the decisiveness of it. And, we're experts in building products and applications and websites and things like that. So when you're an expert, I think you feel like you kind of know what you need to do. And in this case, there was just no time to second guess ourselves. And we had really motivated individuals to work with and a real urgency to get out into the market. And so, it felt good to be able to feel like we were making a difference and be able to get out in the market fast.
Yeah, and there were so many companies that seem to be doing just that as well. I think there was the Formula One teams were creating ventilators along with Dyson, the Hoover manufacturers. Then over here we had breweries and gin makers and even Louis Vuitton actually making hand sanitizer instead of alcohol. So, But I'm curious, if you zoom back from all that, overall, what is your opinion of these citizen-led efforts to actually help contain the virus?
It's inspiring. I think all the different scenarios that you mentioned, they kind of show the best of humanity, right? Yeah. Everybody is being affected by this. It's the great equalizer, and people who have expertise in other things are just saying, how can I apply it here? How can I band together with other people? The people we were working with, nobody was asking, how do I get paid for this? Everyone was just asking, how do I help? And that is a really beautiful moment to be a part of. And, we're excited to be one of the places that was able to help like that.
So what do you think technology can solve for us in the context of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think it's obviously technology is an incredible tool. It's going to help us get better, faster. But this technology is playing out in the real world, and it relies on a partnership between people like you and me, Neil, and our governments and businesses. And so there's kind of only so much that the technology can do without a real cohesion and in a real sense of community and a sense of, the same things we were talking about in the volunteer effort. How are we all going to work together to do this? The technology alone isn't going to be the silver bullet. And, I think here in the United States, without greater leadership at a national level, it's even that much harder. There's no strategy for everyone to build behind, and it's going to be a patchwork of 50 different solutions when it comes to contact tracing. I think if we were hearing, like some countries are, hey, this is our national strategy and this is how we're going to solve this, I think it would be a little bit easier for technology solutions to line up and help. But now it's like technology, the application that you see on your phone is really only one small part of the problem. Writing the code and making the user interface, it's like, that's the easy part. The hard part is getting all the right people on board to be a part of the ecosystem and to adopt the technology and to do the underlying things to make it work. The technology is making a lot of things happen in the real world. Without that, things are going to be a little scattered and slower. And, I think we can do a lot with technology, but, we might not accomplish all that we might without a real sense of community and figuring out how we're going to do it together and make these changes in the real world.
And I'm conscious we've concentrated heavily on the great work and how you've responded to the global pandemic, but obviously you've got your fingers in so many other pies. So looking to the future, what's your primary focus at Upstatement? Is anything else you can share about the other work that you're doing out there?
We just won a Webby Award for our work with a group of scientists at MIT who have done a lot of amazing climate research. And we took their, really esoteric white paper and turned it into this amazing interactive that anyone can use that makes the experience of kind of understanding the science of climate change like a really fun experience. So there's little quizzes built in, and histories and videos and audio and moving backgrounds and stuff like that. And it's this really beautiful, really accessible project that kind of helps people understand, not just the gravity of the situation, but also just understands the science and how we got here, and why we have the scientific consensus that we do. So that project is called MIT Climate.
With those 100-page documents, those white papers, that people, I think, are increasingly starting to struggle to digest in a very visual world. Are you getting more and more requests and more conversations with businesses who want you to help them visualize this data and bring it to life in a format that people can just get that valuable information straight away?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that really goes back to some of the roots that I mentioned at the top of the show, that Upstatement was kind of born in newsrooms at the Boston Globe and New York Times. I think one of our superpowers is, visual storytelling and helping people, helping a mass audience understand complex information. And yeah, data visualization is a big part of that, making white papers understandable and enjoyable and entertaining to read. And that maybe reminds me of another huge project that we worked on this year, which is we developed the data visualization package for PBS NewsHour for all of their election coverage. So all of their maps and all of their all the graphics that appear on the TV, when they're like standing at the big board and moving things around, and on their social media and on their website, we built a huge suite of data visualizations for that. And when you look at a map of the United States and you see the red versus blue, it can look like the red really overwhelms when you're looking at a geographic map, but that's really measuring the geography, not really the number of votes. And so we worked hard with them to come up with a different way of displaying that information that would be, just as immediate as looking at a map like that, but would also show some of the diversity and actually show the fact that, population densities are really different in some of those large states versus some of the small ones that are really packed with density. So we do that kind of visual storytelling all the time. It's one of our favorite things to do. And we in that PBS NewsHour situation, we also, not only did we build the visualizations, but we built an app for them to build their own visualizations, because there are so many different races. There's races in every state and every county, and we gave them a tool that would allow them to generate all of the graphics that they needed on the back end, and then build a beautiful user interface for them to be able to send thousands of graphics onto the television and onto the website and onto their social media. So kind of two layers to that. One is the storytelling, and the other is the technology that allows them to send it out across a ton of different channels.
And just hearing to you talk there, I could almost hear all the light bulb moments going off all over the world, especially for businesses with those dull white papers and how they can bring them to life. And for anyone that wants to explore that, or indeed anything that we've talked about today, what's the best way of listeners finding you online and also contacting your team if they've got any questions?
Yeah, well, the best way is to go to our website, upstatement.com. So it's Upstatement, all one word, up like the direction, statement like a sentence that ends in a period. It's upstatement.com. That's the only, we're the only ones out there. We made up the word. So I think if you put roughly that combination of letters together, you'll find yourself at our website, and you can reach out to us and talk to us about an interesting problem you're trying to solve.
Excellent. Well, I'll have that link to the show notes just so anybody listening will be able to find you nice and easily.
Yeah, and they shouldn't furiously be typing as I'm stumbling over the words and spell it out one letter at a time.
Well, I love what you guys stand for and the great work you're doing, but also for just taking the time to come on here and share that larger story that we don't hear enough about, which is how the tech community has responded to the crisis and what role software can play in containment and of course, design as well, and the important role that plays. But more than anything, just a big thank you for joining me today, Tito.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Neil. It's been a joy.
A big thank you to Tito for allowing us to pull back the curtain and learn how the technology community had responded to the crisis, and gave a great overview there of some of the solutions that are out there and lead that incredibly engaging discussion. So thank you, Tito, for joining me. Now, Upstatement is a creative studio that specialises in digital transformation, but ultimately they love turning ideas into action. And what I love about them is how they collaborate with visionary partners to create positive change in the world. And all their projects actually happen in close contact with clients because they believe that their best work and true innovation springs from those kind of partnerships. But we did cover a lot of ground there, so if you've got any questions or anything you'd like to input after listening to today's conversation, please email me techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can find my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find over 1,200 interviews and also learn more about how you can work with me. And if not, don't worry, we can do it all again tomorrow because I've got another guest lined up and I'll see you all there bright and early. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.